I don't know if you know who a kame is,
No.
but yeah, it's funny. Nobody's ever heard of them. Um, but they have something like over 250,000 servers that are routing traffic for the internet all over the world. Now, I noticed them like years and years and years ago because whenever I would do a trace route between any two IPs on the planet, I would get like 15 Akame servers on the hops. You know, because the way the internet works, you don't like connect your IP doesn't connect directly to, let's say, the website's IP that you're wanting to get information from. It does hops between all these servers. And it was like there wasn't any connection I can make anywhere on the world that didn't have at least 5 hops that went through Akame servers. And now they market themselves as, network security and, network, various network services like CDN, like content delivery and stuff like that. Which is like something YouTube would be huge in. YouTube is going to have certain demand for certain videos all over the planet, and a company like Akame can cache those videos where they're going to be the most watched all over, and they've got 250,000 servers to do it with. But I found out the other day that 90% of the planet is within 1 hop or 2 hops of an Akame server, something like that. So
Wow.
like almost 100% of the traffic goes through their servers. Now, here's where it's interesting, right? Like back when I first saw this, I couldn't make sense of it. I was like my thoughts were like, because I'd never heard of them. There was no Akame. I figured, okay, this must be an infrastructure domain, like maybe owned by ICANN or something, and they just use it, as their domain names for their routing and everything, So I thought it was, I just thought it was an anomaly. I was like, there's no way one company has all these servers all over the planet that every trace route is passing through. Are you guys familiar with Michael Crichton, the author?
Yeah,
He wrote Jurassic Park.
that's right. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, he wrote this other book called State of Fear.
Yeah, I
Okay.
heard about that.
Oh, it's an awesome book. In fact, he died right after it. And the whole thing is he's exposing the whole climate, uh, uh, the
Change.
climate change,
Global
controversy.
warming.
Okay. Yeah. And he blows it out of the water. And I mean, this is a book of fiction, and it has more footnotes than most scientific papers. Okay. So, but Michael Crichton was known for that. Like, cause he always did this crazy technology in his books, but he would say, look, this is based in reality. This isn't science fiction. You know what I mean? He would have footnotes and everything showing like like the real world science that inspires his fictional writing, right?
That's
Well, in the book, now I just read this particular book a couple years ago, maybe 4 years ago, and it's an older book, but I had never read it before. And in the book, he talks about this company, Akame, spelled the exact same way, that uses its tracking and tracing of data on the internet to not only to predict and influence world events. The reason why this came up for me again today was because of my Pogo's chicken dream. I was like, dude, fucking 5G. They're like inserting commercials into my head or something. But I had never heard of Pogo's chicken. And it was like a centerpiece in my dream. And so I go on and I search it.
that's a real thing.
It is, but it's like in Zimbabwe. You know what I mean? There's like there's one Pogo's chicken in Zimbabwe, and there's one Pogo's chicken that I think is probably out of business somewhere in the United States. Okay. That's all I could find on the internet. But then I was thinking about it. I'm like, holy fuck. Like if you were going to test for the effectiveness of influencing what people think about or dream about, inserting something like this that nobody's searching for. Nobody's searching for fucking Pogo's chicken. But if you have the capacity to monitor all the traffic that's going to happen the next day, and all of a sudden there's a 20,000% increase in searches for Pogo's chicken, will that tell you something about the effectiveness of your method? Okay. So that's basically what I want to get into, because there's like a whole bunch around that, as well as like influencing events and predicting events. So I thought it was interesting that he had actually brought him up by name. And like I said, it was in that moment that I realized why they had those servers everywhere.
Interesting.
Because
or at least what infrastructure was afforded to them or allowed to them.
And the reality is, when I was doing these trace routes and they were everywhere, because they can't say it was for content delivery. This is before YouTube. So content delivery wasn't really a big need. You know what I mean? Like the bulk of the internet was, you know, crappy JPEG images and text. Like that's it. You know, that was the majority of the content of the internet. You didn't need to cache it all over the world, you know. It just, the amount of overhead it would have taken to put that together at a time when it was not needed. Like, I can't imagine what that infrastructure would cost, and the maintenance of it, and who knows how much of the fiber optic work they had to put into place. And I'm sure they're on the backbone everywhere they're at. Like the infrastructure alone, we're talking about billions of dollars a year to maintain this, you know, and they were doing it at a time when it wasn't needed. You know, so I thought it was interesting. And then when I got over my falling victim to my Pogo search, I did a search for a Kame, and I wasn't just searching for them, because, you know, I could find their website. I was looking for other stuff that, you know, mentioned them, you know, and I found an NSA pamphlet that just goes into detail about networking and the future of networking, and it's either written by people at a Kame, or so basically there's a relationship there between the NSA and a Kame. Of course there is.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's something I'd like to get into after our World is a Mirror.
You don't want to just get on it right now?
I know, huh? Really.
And interestingly, when you talked about infrastructure, how they just passed a huge infrastructure bill.
Oh, here in the United States?
I don't know.
I did see something about that. I didn't look into it yet, though.
Well, that's that, whatever that 2.9 billion thing, I think.
Yeah, but that's supposedly, you know, for bridges and roads and shit like that. Like, in reality, they've spent trillions on the internet infrastructure worldwide. And like I said, this Kame company, I don't know who the fuck funded them. Most likely the funding came out of the NSA and the CIA, because this huge infrastructure that was put together at a time where it was clearly not needed and clearly could not be profitable.
What about now? Has the technology caught up to their infrastructure? Is it now a worthwhile system?
Oh, fuck yeah, because of media delivery. You've got Disney Plus, you've got Netflix, you've got YouTube. This network caches all those movies worldwide. And so when I want to watch a Netflix video in Zimbabwe, right next to my Pogo's chicken, it comes right up. And I have no bandwidth issues or anything, because it's actually hosted on a Kame server that's a couple miles away, you know.
I would like to know when they started building this system. It didn't take a year to put it together. This must have taken decades to do.
Exactly. And like I said, it was vast decades ago. I was blown away by it. Like I said, I wrote it off. I'm like, there's no way this is an actual company or something that owns all these servers. Because then I started like tracking the IP addresses to make sure I wasn't just hitting the same. Like I thought maybe all my shit was being routed through just the same group, but I'd pick a different point on the other side of the planet, and it's still hitting Akame servers, but all different IPs, all different DNS names. Damn. Yeah. It was crazy. You could not hit a single location on the planet without traveling through multiple Akame servers.
So they must be at 100% by now. There's no way they're still at 90 or less.
No, this was in 2019. They reported that 90% of the population is within 2 hops or something like that of an Akame server, which basically means your internet service provider and then Akame. You know what I mean?
Yeah, anytime you connect with any website or anything online, it's going to hit an Akame server. 90% is a lot. You'd have to
even
hit
if your
next
neighbor,
server.
even if your neighbor's hosting the website at home, you're still going through an Akame server to get to his website.
What about some of those private servers that people have talked about, where you store all your stuff on this one server and it's end-to-end encrypted and all that stuff? If it's still going through an Akame, let's call it Abercrombie, an Akame or Akame server, I guess I don't really know how the tunneling works and the encryption and the privacy aspects of it work, but is it put all of that stuff in jeopardy, susceptible or available to their staff?
Well, so look at it this way. A majority of the traffic nowadays is over SSL, meaning it's a secured, you and the website that you're getting information from create a encrypted tunnel, and all the information passes through that. So none of the information that goes from that website to you or from you to that website is readable to anyone, okay? But here's the thing. How did you get to the website, right? So a request, which is the URL or the URI, is made, and that's what they see, okay? And so they already know, they have the entire internet cached. So when a URL gets requested by your browser, they know it. So they already know the content of the page you're going to. You know what I mean? And so by tracking this, and not only that, let's say you go to a website, okay, they can't see, let's say you're leaving a comment. They can't see the comment as it's going from your computer to the comment box on the website. But as soon as you post it, it's now part of the website itself and is now readable and cached by them.
Right,
okay?
So what they cache.
Right, and this is how they predict future events and stuff. They actually, let's say you could take every word that everyone typed on the internet in a day, okay? What this is going to show you is trends of the way people are thinking. And this is funny. This is actually kind of leading into our conversation. and the way people are thinking is going to determine how events unfold, okay? So, and it's funny because in Michael Crichton's book, that was it's funny. They're not even a plot point. It's mentioned in passing in the book. In fact, if you look up any summaries of the book, you can't find any mention about this tech company or anything else, right? It's not a major plot point. But in it, there's this organization that's creating these false weather events using technology, right? Creating tsunamis and crazy ice overs and, shit like that using this technology to pass their agendas around the quote unquote climate change crisis. Okay. And they were using this company was monitoring to see, because you can determine how people are thinking. Are we there yet? Are people going to accept this yet? Is this the right time? You know what I mean? They can gauge where everyone in the world is at emotionally and mentally. They actually, in the NSA document I brought up about Akame, they talk about this vast multitude of metrics that they're using to graph this. They call it extremely complex models, like a human being, like human society, right? These are extremely complex models. And they showed these graphing techniques that they're using. And then like that shit was blowing my mind because I'm like, what the, yeah, I guess there's a way to make sense of this. You know what I mean? And they've been developing these methods of making sense of this vast amount of data for decades.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
To take not just an individual's, what I would consider random expressions across the planet, but then to take billions of them all expressing at the same time and to find patterns in it.
Right.
And then create an algorithm to condense and analyze that information to predict something. That would take decades.
Now remember, what brought this back to the foreground with me was a conversation I had with someone where they said they knew someone who worked at a commie, right? Guess what his job was?
What?
Writing algorithms. Because that's what it's all about. Because the algorithms are what's going to make sense of this vast data set.
Do you think they would compartmentalize that at all? So it's not just like...
Oh yeah. The guy has no idea what he's doing. You know? Especially because if you're writing an algorithm, you're writing it so it's open-ended. It's not like the algorithm itself isn't designed or built around a certain type of data. It's built for data in general. You feed in parameters, it gives you output. That's how you design it. If you make it too restricted to like specific types or kinds of data, it's not a very valuable algorithm. You know what I mean? So it's got to be open. And the more parameters you feed into it, and the more accurate the data that comes out of it because of those parameters, the more effective it is as an algorithm. Okay. I told you that website that I had with my brother, that's what I did and why we were so successful in such a short amount of time was the entire website was AI driven. It was all algorithms. I was reading what I was monitoring everything everyone did on the website and using that so that the website was modifying itself to move the popular stuff in front of people's eyes to, you know what I mean? Like it was engaging the consumer by designing itself in a way that they wanted it to be without knowing it. You know what I mean? That was the algorithms that drove that website and why we exploded in success. Now this is back before Facebook. This was MySpace. Like the whole website was MySpace content. That's all it was. And we went from nothing, a website with zero traffic, zero customers in a market that already had hundreds of people doing what we were doing. We became number one within 4 months, making
what was the website called again?
100 times the ad revenue of our closest competitor. It was called ZooSpace, XOOSPACE. In fact, because I remember on the Wayback Machine, it's still got the website cached on there. Now it's not functional, you know what I mean? Because it was a data-driven site, but they've got like images of, well, not images, but like HTML mock-ups of several of my pages, but they're not functional because they don't have all the server-side scripting that generated the website itself.
Yeah, because I remember finding websites similar to yours where I was customizing the backdrop or the layout or whatever of my MySpace page. And that had to have been like the year after Facebook launched, and I was still running multiple bands and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. You might have used my shit. In fact, there's a really good chance you did because it was the most popular one.
Yeah, I mean, someone was like, "Oh, I just used this thing," and when I would Google that name, it would come up with like a top 3, and I would just pick one that worked the easiest, basically. Oh, this looks cool. And then you would just copy the CSS or whatever the code was, and then paste it into your Facebook comment box or something, and poof, it would pop up.
Yep.
Oh, those were the days. I still wonder if MySpace would have ever turned into Facebook. Probably.
No, because that's what distinguished them, was the algorithms. The algorithms that were created and are at the foundation of Facebook are far superior to MySpace. In fact, I don't think MySpace had any algorithms. You know, you got Tom as a friend.
Every time.
That's as deep as their algorithms went. You know what I mean? It was very surfacey. There was no depth to the complexity of its structure. And Facebook launched with a depth of algorithmic complexity that MySpace to this day doesn't have.
Yeah, that's right. Let's not forget that MySpace still exists.
I know. I actually went and found my page on there. I don't know, a couple months ago or something, because I was just curious. I'm like, dude, and there's no way I could ever get into it because I'm sure I don't even have the email I created an account.
You got me curious. I bet you I still have a MySpace.
Yeah, I mean, it had been basically flushed of everything but like 3 or 4 photos. Like, there was nothing to it. It was a hollow structure, so to speak. But I don't know if I had any friends or whatever, you know what I mean? Because I can't get into it, so I don't know anything about my own account. But
boom, there it is. Got a MySpace still.
Yeah, you brought it up.
Yep. And everybody that's on here still looks like they did 15 years ago because no one's changed their photos. Oh shit, this is hilarious.
Funny. So yeah, so that's the capacity. I mean, is if you get back to this vast data set, right, which is everything happening on the internet. Like, yes, your connections to websites and things like that are secure. They're SSL encrypted, but you got to remember the content of that page is known. Anything you leave on that page is known. And so there is this ability when you're talking about who knows how many interactions, like how many web requests do you make in a day when you include your laptop, tablets, phones, and you consider that your apps are doing it without you even intentionally doing it all day long. And then you consider that these apps are transmitting information like locations and, you know, as much metadata as they can legally get away with all the time. The apps you have loaded on your phone are always communicating. So when you take that into consideration, you have an really many algorithms that can take this complex set of data. You know, so we talked about being able to predict events, right? But you can also manufacture events. Like, how many Twitter users do you think are not even real people? What percentage?
Oh, I'm sure it's a lot.
0.1%? Is it 1%?
I would say like 10%
Is it
or something.
10%? Yeah. What if it's more? Like, remember, it's algorithmic. Like, you could create bots and algorithms. I could create a software program that's more complex than most human beings I know, because they're so rooted in their reactions to the world, you know. So it would not be difficult or complicated to create algorithms that are doing Facebook posts, Twitter posts, like, again, affecting. And not only that, when you know that certain types of content and certain types of language will affect people psychologically in a certain way. Well, now that you've got this vast data set and you've been able to successfully predict events and successfully determine the state of mind and the psychological state of people and their likely actions and their emotions and things like that, could you now steer world events?
Of course.
Of course. Of course. Because you could
not even in a subtle way.
No, like dramatically.
I mean, there was I don't know if you saw that documentary about Cambridge Analytica on Netflix.
Yeah, and to me, that's child's play.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what's out there in the public on Netflix. What the real tech behind the scenes in is decades past whatever that is. And if they have, I forget what the statistic exactly was, but it was something like they only need 17 data points on an individual to predict their behavior, and they have over 500 data points on every American in the country that's on, the internet at large. This excludes like 95-year-olds that are like, what's an iPad? Those people. But for the vast majority, they have over 500 something data points on everybody, which easily is able to predict things. And they said you don't need to know like the predictive nature of their data point. Them to basically make the distinction whether or not this individual can be manipulated or cannot be manipulated. And if they can be manipulated, in what direction. And so they basically prey on the people that on any given subject, whatever it may be, they may or may not have made up their mind about something, or the 1 degree in any direction, the entire plate will then shift and everybody slides. And so it's really, you don't need hardly anybody to affect massive amounts of people. Even we talked about the 100th monkey thing, where there was a certain amount of people that there's a tipping point, basically. I don't even think it's that much anymore. I forget what it was, 6% or something?
Yeah. It's something like that. No, it's, I want to say let's say a 1 in 8. So it's a lot more than 6%, but it's a, what do they call it? Fuck. No, it's not called a tipping point. It's called a fuck. I forget the term. The term has escaped me at the moment. But it's like it's an effective collective consciousness. That was the whole demonstration of the 100th monkey is a collective consciousness, because monkeys' behavior on one island was affecting monkeys' behaviors on multiple islands simultaneously. So it had affected monkey collective consciousness. There's at a certain point, and God, what is the word? It's not threshold. It's
saturation.
No, damn it. But yeah, it's at a certain point, like when enough people are aware and conscious of something, it affects the entire collective consciousness.
So what would it take to, instead of add new information in, to ever so slightly shift the current state of mind? Like, to say specifically, like the 100th monkey, the initial experiments were done with taking peeled mangoes, and putting them in the sand.
It's called critical mass. Critical mass. Yes.
So say this was something where, like, well, we don't even, we all love mangoes, but instead of saying we don't like mangoes, or I'm going to add in this new information about how to clean mangoes, to say maybe not everybody likes mangoes. Adding in a little bit of doubt. I would imagine that would take a lower level of critical mass than something to add in a new behavior or entire new belief system.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say you could do, in reality, an individual, if no one else thinks what you're thinking, you can doubt what the collective consciousness fully believes. You know what I mean? Like, you're not completely subject to, like, even the data points of, let's say, Cambridge Analytica. Like, okay, how much influence can they have? Their predictability is only so effective. Like, oh, if we show this ad, they're going to buy this stuff. Yeah, no, not really. Maybe 15% of the people will buy that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, but we know everything about you. You don't. Like, they're basing their knowledge on what we call the basic psychological factors, right? That they break people's personalities down by. So that's how they're judging it. They're like, okay, based on what you look at, based on what you click on, based on other metadata that we've collected from your phone companies and your cable companies and things like that, we know you to have these aspects of the big 5 personality traits, right? And based on that, we in general know how you would react to this type of information, to this type of product, right? But it's a generality, okay? That's not where the power is in affecting the individual. The power is in seeing the vast majority and how that's going to affect the world. Like you and then being able to influence the vast majority, right? Not getting you to buy a particular product, but getting you into a certain emotional state, which could either support or prevent some event that we want to occur, right? So in that way, that's where the power is at, and that's why these algorithms that can analyze these vast data sets and make some sense, create some kind of usable metrics out of them. That's where the value is. It's really not on the individual or on the individual level. It's not that effective.
Well, that's what they talked about in that documentary too. They weren't saying that this is something you can get to market to these susceptible people so they'll go buy more Nikes.
Right.
It was using it to incite civil unrest, and it was using it to fuel Brexit and the Trump administration and whatever else. Because if you show people, like, say, a black dude getting harassed by the cops over and over and over, what it creates in the collective consciousness of that country is a general understanding or belief that the police are not to be trusted, or that black people are victims. And what can you do with now that state of mind is really what they were talking about. So you find those data points, the people that will generate the fear and the people that will take this on subconsciously, that's what they're learning through the data points.
Right. And here's an interesting little fact, because we've seen that. Media's been doing that, right? They've been selling you on the idea that black people are being hunted down and murdered by police, right? That's the idea you've been sold. They went around and did interviews with people. Like, how many black people do you think were murdered by police last year, right? And now here's where it gets funny. You saw numbers from, like, a majority of the people were answering like thousands to tens of thousands, and some as far as 100,000. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, what's the actual?
How many of these people you think are in the country that can die like that every year?
Well, you know what the actual number of black men killed by police in 2019 when they were doing this little experiment?
17.
19.
19. Oh, shit.
10.
It was 19. It was 19.
Now, that's not in, like, Detroit or something, right? That's in the entire country.
No, that's the entire country.
Gee. And that's not like just
how
white
many
cops,
white
right?
men?
Say it again, Todd.
I said that's a good how many white men?
More.
24.
I don't remember how many. I mean, again, none of those numbers are a lot. Defenseless people killed by police is not a big number for any demographic. Okay, but the imagery that's been pumped through media has convinced people that it's thousands a year.
It's an epidemic.
Yeah.
And that's actually less than the black on black shooting in Chicago on a weekend.
Oh, fuck yeah. Yeah.
Or in other cities too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of blown away. I'm like, really? That's it? like if I was a cop and my job was to be dealing with dangerous people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and how many, I don't know, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of cops are there in this country? And in a year, they registered a couple dozen? Wow, that's remarkable. You don't get those. That's really an amazing result.
Well, it brings my mind to the question of what are we seeing? Are we seeing every single possible point of harassment? Are we seeing the worst of the worst? Are we seeing reruns from the last 5 years? Like, what is it that everybody's getting exposed to?
Well, I mean, think about it. How many did you see in 2020? 4?
All of them. Oh, yeah, 4, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But they were blown way out of proportion.
True that.
And acted as if this is what's happening all the time. And it's not. It's clearly not.
Now, I wonder if it's increasing with the attention the media is giving it.
No, because cops are like, fuck this, and won't get out of their cars.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
It's made the cops like, we're not doing our jobs. Fuck you guys. You want ban the police or defund the police? Okay, take care of yourselves. Good luck with that. So you now have them. They won't even get out of their cars. Just drive down the street. Somebody's mugging someone up. That's too bad.
Looks like a black guy. He looks dangerous. Let's keep going.
Exactly. Because if it is someone who's being violent, there's a good chance you're going to have to pull out your gun, and there's a good chance they may get killed. And then what? You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your pension. You're going to lose your life is going to be destroyed because you decided to do your job.
So this actually is a great segue to the topic of tonight, because the way the world actually is drastically different than the way the world, the people's interpretation of the world is, especially when it comes to police violence and what we've just been talking about. So the world as my mirror, which is the subject for tonight, I'm really seeing the way the world, I think the way the world is, instead of the way the world actually is. Nobody's really caring much about the statistics. In fact, that's not even really part of the conversation. The conversation is about, look at these 4 examples of the worldview or the ideology or the mentality we're pushing, or that is being pushed. Yeah.
So, good evening, guys and ladies.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi. It's an interesting topic. I think Gingy, I had a neighbor who did an analysis of incarceration by race. And we totally had expected, I helped him spin the data, do the graphs and that sort of thing. And it was really from the, what was it? The Public Information Act, or, whatever that's called. He was able to get Yeah, he was able to get the information on all the cases, and he was, he was familiar with the system, so he knew a few people and was able to get some files there as well. Anyway, what ultimately happened after 3 years of us analyzing this is it wasn't a matter of race, it was a matter of wealth. And I don't know how this relates to the mirror, but just speaking into what you guys are talking about beforehand, it was a matter of wealth, which ended up deducing into a matter of race, right? You know, it ended up that there was an un, an unnatural skew towards minorities, but if you took a poor white man and a rich black man, the poor white man was going to suffer tremendously with the same crime. So when we compared this different races and one being wealthy, and how did they know who showed up in court with what kind of attorney and who showed up with the orange jumpsuit, right? And that's how they deduced whether they had chattel on their hands or whether they somebody actually had money and could pay the system to exit. So that was sort of interesting. The other interesting thing that happened last week, I think that sort of speaks into what you guys are talking about, is I had a prospect that I took to lunch, and he's a Harvard grad data scientist, and we were talking about the difference between AI, machine learning, and really analytics. And so, Brandon, as you're talking about the collection of data, that is, you have all of this data, but it's just subsets of data that become part of the toolbox of data. It's not until you get into the data science, which is the guys that write the algorithms, that do your predictive and your prescriptive analytics or algorithms, where they the what if analysis. And that's where making that distinction for me was helpful, right? It went from like a data all over the place conversation to how do they actually use it. So they go into all of this data and this toolbox, and they have these data scientists that actually sort of run simulations and what if scenarios that are pretty complicated. So that was interesting. And I forgot what I was saying. Oh, and the other thing I think that came up while you guys were talking was, if you go to like a legal deposition, like you can see some of the sort of NLP or, the antics that attorneys are using in the course of interrogating people, if you will. And if they're not getting the answer they want, they ask a series of NLP based questions or grounding questions to sort of, like, for example, if, let's see, what would be an example? If they asked a question that was somewhat subjective and you're giving an answer they don't necessarily want documented in a deposition, they might ask you, is your name ABC, or something really that's sort of factual, and bring it back to facts and sort of reset the conversation. And then at the end of a deposition is like the list of all the terms, that every word that was used in that deposition and how many times it was actually said. So it was fascinating to me to sort of, when we were always talking to the data scientists, just think through, all the different types of data we've seen collected over the years, whether it be this bonding, whether it be depositions, like this shit's been going on for a long ass time. And it is well beyond most of our, it sounds like Gingy and Brandon, you guys are obviously, you get it. But I don't know. Sometimes I'm just like, what the hell? It scares the crap out of me. Anyway, I went left on y'all, but thanks for giving me space to speak.
Yeah, it's all good. Thanks for sharing, Rachel. One of the things that I think is important about what you said is it's not just a single data point or a single reason. Like you were talking about, the product of your guys' research showed that it wasn't the race that was the most significant indicator. It was the level of income, and so multivariate analysis or research is important, because I would say that it's usually never just one reason. there are multiple factors that play into the likelihood of a specific outcome, especially when you're dealing with people. It's like a soup of potentials. So knowing that, to when you hear anybody start to define, oh, well, this is the way it is in the world because of this. Okay, that's one interpretation. That's one variant. What are the other factors at play? Because there's always more. Like Brandon said, human beings are vastly complicated, and the human societies are even more so complicated. So it's important to realize that it's never really just one issue, as far as I've noticed. Anyway. Brandon might have a different idea about it than I do. Did you guys do much of that, Rachel? Multivariate analysis?
Yeah, he eventually took it to a data scientist. I could help him spin things in Excel being an accountant, but when it came to, complex analysis, yeah, he took it to a data scientist. I haven't followed up with them, but I could do that. But it did deduce the same sort of, wealth being a driving factor. And then there were some other interesting pieces of insight and intel in there. I just can't share that because I don't recall.
One of the things Brandon and I were talking about recently is that one of the biggest indicators that you have for the performance and how people will perform or make out in their life is primarily about culture. And you'll find that people that are from the same areas, that had similar upbringings and similar access to resources, they'll have similar outcomes in life too. And so culture is, again, not just a single input, but a large volume of different inputs. The culture includes location and ideologies and a ton of stuff that vary drastically. But that's probably the biggest thing that we've noticed that influences people's behavior more than anything. And then culture obviously is kind of a level of programming, if you will, but also something that people end up choosing into at a certain point in their life. Like the culture of your home city versus the city that you're living in, or your home city versus your home city now, since you were born until you're a full-grown adult, the culture shifts, and it does from day to day and year to year and all of that. That's the biggest, that and environment, which environment is part of the culture. You can't take the humans out of the environment and still call them humans. Rachel, were you going to say something?
I was thinking about, what was I going to say? When y'all were speaking into sort of the, what we're watching on television. If you're watching television, I'm not watching much television, but pretty much people being sort of pushed in a direction, psychologically manipulated, if you will. How do you go about, or, through your culture or whatever, right? So I don't watch much television. I've made it a point recently to watch close to none, and yet I'm still getting, all the energy of that in my life from the people that are, that I check in with daily, or people that I interface with daily. So they're just telling me the same BS that the TV's telling them. But when do you know you have a problem? When do you know that there's a race issue that needs to get handled? Or there's some checks and balances, and whatever environment we're in that need to take place, if you can't trust anything around you. It's like, how do you discern?
How do you discern what you can trust, or when there's a problem, or what's the question?
Yeah, there's some, I can discern what's within me. I can discern what I'm touching and seeing in the course of my day. But in terms of social justice or social matters that are beyond me but in my community, how do I know whether those are agendas or whether those are truths? Like, I'm just curious So the conversation is society being a mirror. Meanwhile, if we're talking about society being manipulated, it's just, I don't know, there's some kind of paradox in there that's hard for me to figure out.
So it's, let's see, how can I put this? Because there's a bunch in that question. Well, let's say at first it starts out with worldview. The way that you experience the world, like we were talking about with the police on Black people, brutality, and some of those other issues that are circulating right now. The worldview, how we experience the world, is often, if not always, different from the way the world actually is. And this is what we were talking about a couple episodes ago on one of the books, Loving What Is. So what's transpiring here for people is not actually going out and saying, hey, look, there's a problem. Black people are being brutalized and terrorized and killed in these vast numbers by police officers. What's happening is that's being shown enough times to adjust the worldview of the people paying attention to whatever that news outlet is. And then what can you do with people that are now hold this new worldview? So for you, it's about checking in with yourself and seeing if you're just parroting what you're hearing, if you're, if the problem you've identified in the world actually exists in the world, if it only exists within yourself. Like Brandon said, he looked into it and he was like, well, guess how many Black people died at the hands of police last year? Or not last year, it was 2019 or something. It was only like 17, which him and I were joking last year when COVID came out, kids under 5 had killed more people than COVID did. Should we lock them up? Should we quarantine them? They killed a hell of a lot more people than the police departments did in the entire country. And so it's, when you put it into context and you look to see if it's actually a threat, then that's when you can start to use some of that discernment. Like last year, one of the big things that kept being thrown around ever since, flatten the curve was how many new cases of COVID was coming out. Oh, there's this many new cases today and this many new cases. And nobody continued talking about how many people were actually dying from it. And something Brandon and I would do is get on to the our World in Data website or the CDC website or a number of other websites that are reporting on the death certificates being filed and other information. And it showed consistently the majority of the year, deaths were on a decline. And that's if you trust the numbers that are coming through those systems. And so for me, I quickly unplugged my head from the media and I was like, yeah, there's so many more people getting it, but there's less people dying from it. So instead of being terrified that so many people are getting it nowadays and that anybody around me could potentially have it and to be fearful, I'm going to choose to realize that less and less people are being reportedly killed from this thing. And to me,
miraculously, less and less people were getting and dying from pneumonia and the flu. And I noticed
right.
that in the statistics back in April of last year. I was like, no, this isn't right. I go, all of a sudden, all the stats for pneumonia, for flu had just dropped to 0. And looking at all the years past, they weren't at 0 at that time of the year. So it was clearly skew. And again, statistics can be helpful and they can be skewed, to muddle an idea, or to create or to support an ideology. And you and I had a conversation last week about ideology and what ideology is. And ideology, at its foundational levels, is trying to create a truth about something based on very few variables. And that's what they do with the statistics, like incarceration rates, like the gender pay gap, like all these statistics that they throw out there and they say, see, look, and they're basing it on 1 or 2 variables, where human beings and human society is an extraordinarily complex system that cannot be boiled down to one or two variables. And that's the biggest problem with this. And I mean, I had to drop off for a minute, so I didn't get to see where you guys. I don't even know how we got here, but
Well, Rachel was specifically asking about how to discern whether you're being manipulated or if there's an actual problem in the world to address. And I went into it starts with worldview. And talking about last year, the worldview was COVID is getting worse and worse and worse and more dangerous and more dangerous and more dangerous because so many more people are getting it. But the fact of the matter is, for me anyway, the bottom line was how many people are being killed from it. And that number continued to drop and drop and drop and drop. So I actually felt lighter and happier and less fearful as the year went on as I watched these numbers drop. Whether or not the thing actually exists or is actually deadly or anything else, just the pure data being reported showed, yes, more people testing positive, but less people dying. And that's an amazing gap that was starting to show up. Like out of every 1,000 people that get it, one person dies. That's pretty good. And then the next month, wow, every 10,000 people that get it, one person dies. So I was like, my chances are getting better and better. So it's I think that kind of sums up your question, doesn't it, Rachel? It was about where to place that discernment in several different things.
Yeah, I was just curious if we were going to land anywhere. I mean, you know what I mean? Like if we were just going to have a conversation about big data and then end up out in the abyss, but because I don't know, it left me a little bit uncomfortable and incomplete thinking. I mean, obviously you guys are right. And I love, Brandon, what you're saying about like, oh, it's interesting. Nobody died of pneumonia or the flu, right? Everybody's dying of COVID. Call it all COVID, right? And looking at other data sets, if you will, but not everybody has time for all that, right?
Right. And I would say the discernment is in your capacity to think for yourself and not just take what the meaning of numbers are or the meaning of anything from someone else. Think it through. Like if people are dropping dead all around you, you're like, oh shit, there's something wrong. But if nobody's dropping dead all around you, like, okay, maybe this isn't that serious. Like that's based on my observation. In my world, I don't know one person that's died of COVID. Not one. Not one. I don't even know anyone who's gotten really sick from it. I've heard people who say they tested positive for it,